What's up, everybody? Hopefully you can hear me. Just realized my mic was on mute for a second there. Um, and yeah, I see there's a couple of you guys watching right now. So if you could just let me know in the chat that everything's working well as per usual, I'd appreciate it. And then we will dive into it. So today, going to change things up a little bit. Want to look at my MLB model because some people have been asking. So I'm going to show you sort of how it works as well as a few tips and tricks with that. And we're going to recap the NHL since we spoke 2 weeks ago. And I'll give out some free picks for everyone who sticks around until the end. But I'm just going to wait a second until a few more people join, and then we'll get going. I also really need to remind myself to stop wearing green on these streams. One of my tattoos has green, so I can't do anything about that. But my logo, or these logos, it's starting to throw me for a loop here. You're looking through me. So, anyways, okay. Well, I guess I'm gonna get started. So, 2 weeks ago, was the last stream. There wasn't a stream last week because my computer was running a bunch of model calculations, and it was using up 100% of my CPU cores. So I didn't have the bandwidth available to stream as well, because I wanted to get something done, and it would have taken 12 hours had I not used all my cores, but it only ended up taking 4 at the sacrifice of the stream, but that's okay. But 2 weeks ago, if you'll recall, gave out 4 NHL picks, and we went 4-0, which was awesome. I was super pumped to see that. Doesn't happen every day. That was, if I slide myself out of the way, that was February 25th, and that was actually our most profitable day of the year so far. So that was pretty nice. And then the rest of February was okay, and similar to the beginning of February, the beginning of March has not been great. We're losing almost daily. We've had one decent winning day, but again, there's not much you can do about it. It's the way it is. I'm still confident. Like, we're still profitable on the year. So if we look up here, you can see like March to date is losing month, but January, Feb, we're profitable. Our ROI is dipped a bit, but we're still at almost 19% ROI, which is decent, and we're profitable. So that's all that matters. Obviously, we want to be more profitable than not. But the thing is, it's been a weird month, and like I guess our model just doesn't like the beginnings of month because it's almost identical to February as well. I'm not making any major changes like I've harped on before. I am really trying not to go into panic mode. Just got to ride out the variance, right? Especially with hockey. There's more variance in hockey than in any of the other 4 major sports. And just this league this year has been wild. And I'm not going to harp on it too much because I've already talked about this a bunch. And I'm not even, like I said last time, it goes both ways. We've been on both sides of it. But just in general, even games we're not betting, the amount of lead changes and multi-goal comebacks this year, it's unlike anything I've ever seen, and it's to this point it's almost every night. It's actually really fascinating to see. But with that comes a lot of variance, and so you just need to withstand the variance. So I've made some minor tweaks, and you can see like we're not. You saw earlier, like we're not having a great start to the month. But we've also been making plays like this. This was Detroit and Carolina. This was a pure value play. So the model had Carolina only at 37% to win. But the odds that we were given at 3.52 is, quick math, is 1 divided by 3.52. Oops, that's going to put it into a date because I have dates in that category. Is 28%. So you can see we had them at 37%. So still certainly nowhere close to winning this game, even half the time. But 37% compared to 28% is 9% edge, right? So theoretically, over the long run, we'll say, this is actually a profitable bet. Um, but it has not been a profitable bet this year so far. And so the only tweak I've made is I'm essentially not going to be betting these big dogs anymore that the model had. If my model still projects the team to lose, but they're going to lose less often than the odds would suggest, I'm just not going to bet them anymore, at least for now. I'm still tracking everything. Um, and I'm just going to focus on any teams that it's basically like 49% to win or better. If there's value, then I'll take them. And again, in years past, I would have bet this all day long and made all these bets. But just the way that the divisions are shaking up this year, it just to date it hasn't really been profitable. So I'm just gonna stop flushing money down the toilet. And if it switches and it turns out that the rest of the year it goes on a big run and it's profitable, well, so be it, right? I can always revert back if we see things start to trend, but again, not something I'm going to worry too much about. And then again, just silly things like this Chicago Tampa Bay. This was a blown 2-goal lead in the third period. It happens. We've been, like I said, we've been on both sides of it. It's just, the second half of February, we got the luck coming back to us, and we ended up making up our losses and profiting. And then the first half of March so far, the luck's been against us. We had Boston, New York. It's a shootout loss. What can you do? It's a pick'em, right? It happens. So I'm not going to worry about it too much, and just go about my business and keep going, keep placing bets, and trust the process. So that's all I'm going to say about the recap. Really, I want to start talking about some MLB. I'm going to come back to NHL towards the end, and we'll look at sort of like what the model outputs for today, as well as some like free picks if you're watching this live or if you catch this before puck drop tonight. So I'm going to move on from this, and let's let me just switch over. I think it's this one. So let's talk MLB, and this is going to be a little bit tricky just because this model is kind of unwieldy. Is that a word? I think I'm saying that wrong. It's pretty big. Like if you look across, like these are my outputs. And the reason for this, it looks a lot scarier than it is. I'm just tracking full game as well as totals and first 5 bets. So I can just do it all in one line and I don't have to like repeat formulas multiple times. So that's why. But the output turns out to be pretty aggressive. So this is the MLB model. And people have been asking, especially members in the Slack group, have been asking just sort of walk them through the process and things like that. So I'm going to do that now and talk about it. I'm not going to like show you how to build a model because if you're a member, you know how to do that. And if you're not a member, you should sign up to actionbackers.com. Use code WELCOME20 and you get $20 off your first month and you can learn how to build models. But I'll show you sort of how I put things together, essentially. Okay, so for this, full disclosure, I am using Fangraphs for all my stats. If you don't know about Fangraphs, awesome website. They do amazing baseball work. The advanced stats are just crazy. And I'm just going to pull, I'm going to pull myself back over here again. They do just crazy good work, and you get splits and different leaderboards, and you get team stats, pitcher stats, player stats, everything you could ever want you can find on Fangraphs. It can be a bit challenging if you're not used to it to navigate sometimes, but once you get used to it, it's pretty simple to use. The only other thing to note, and what we'll see in a second, if you've watched in the past where a lot of the stuff you can bring in to like Google Sheets using like import HTML, that works for some tables, but for other tables it doesn't work. And the reason for this is they dynamically generate a lot of these tables using like JavaScript. So if you wanted to like automate your process, you essentially would have to build a scraper and scrape the data in. But the interesting thing is I actually built a scraper for Fangraphs last summer, and I posted it. If you're a member of Action Backers, it's in the Slack chat. I posted it as a coding example. But the interesting thing about it is it's actually just as fast to just manually grab the data every day as it is to like run the script and grab the data from the script output. So that's a tangent, just for members who are watching or people who are curious, who've maybe followed along some other videos. But essentially with my MLB model, all of my team and player data I'm getting from Fangraphs. And then the only other website I use simply for their park factors is ESPN. And we'll touch on that in a couple minutes. So before we get into like how the projections work and everything, I'll just show you. And I actually made some tweaks to this after the season. So some of these things I have a notebook somewhere, but I'm not exactly certain as to why I made some of these tweaks, but I think I know why. And for those wondering, actually, sorry, I know I'm jumping all over the place. But this MLB model, if we go back to our, this is what I'll call my COVID archive. Using this MLB model, you can see our ROI was 156%. So it did really, really well. And the yield wasn't as high as I would like. Obviously, the ROI is what I care about because, you're growing your bankroll. The yield is just like essentially efficiency of bets. And this was a little bit low. And so the interesting I found doing some analysis after the season is actually over 80% of my profit from August 1st onwards came from first 5 bets. And I have a theory as to why. Or part of a theory as to why, and that's one of the changes I made. So, if we go back, essentially, it's to do with how I was calculating the bullpen. Okay, so like, if I'm taking a pitcher, a left-handed pitcher, I would essentially what I would be doing is I would be taking the team batting versus lefties. And so this is a team versus lefties, and this is all their stats. Except, and the issue is this is for a full game if they're facing a lefty for 9 innings, right? And so what happens, well, obviously once you get into the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th inning, when you're facing the bullpen, the likelihood of everyone in the bullpen being a lefty is extremely low. And so I think that's why the accuracy fell off a little bit for the full game, whereas for first 5, when it was just using starting pitcher, it was very accurate. So I made an adjustment, and I made it very quickly. I don't know if it makes sense or not. It did at the time, but I haven't had a chance to test it. So essentially what I've done, so I have team batting versus lefties, team batting versus righties. And then I have the third, which is just team batting in general, so not split up. And then, so what I'm doing is I'm essentially taking their general, and then I've blacked out my coefficients because, again, I'm not showing you how to build the model, and I don't want people to just grab random coefficients and plug them in without knowing what they do. But essentially, this is just an adjustment, and I'm using 60-40 split. You could use 65-35, but 60-40 I think is roughly like 5 2/3 innings for the starter, which seems about accurate for an average start. And this is just in team batting general, and I'm just taking an adjustment. And again, this was not in my model last year. This is something I've done. I have not tested this. So if you want to hold on a second, I'll get into like how it works. But But essentially, I'm just taking like what I'm calling expected runs that I've derived, and then I'm just multiplying it by the point 0.4 to get like your bullpen. And this is my thinking is it's an average of lefties and righties for general. So this is how the teams would bat against a lefty and righty in general. And then I would just apply that to either the lefty or the righty. So again, I have their X runs, and then I have like 60% of the game, and then I'm taking the adjusted runs, and essentially what this is it's just taking this adjustment, so 60% of whatever their output against lefties is, and then it's just adding it to that 40% number we calculated in the general to get their new quote-unquote adjusted runs. So you can see, just as a quick example, I know Seattle's one of the teams. So for Seattle, the adjustment, it has them at like 3.61 runs. And if we go back to our projections, you can see it's pulling in Seattle at 3.61 runs. And it just so happens that it has the Athletics at that as well. If I change this to a different team, that should update, and it did update. And this is all based on like pitchers and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go back. But essentially, that's what that does. So again, I have not tested that. What I did last year is I just brought in lefties and I just brought in righties, and then I would use this adjusted runs number, okay? Or this X runs number. The rank is just there for a reference for me. It doesn't factor in anything. It's just so I can see if things are making sense, to see who the better performing teams against lefties and righties are. So you can see over the given sample, like in this example, Detroit, against lefties, they were actually first for projected runs, which who knew, right? So essentially, I just get my team batting versus lefties, team batting versus righties, and again, I'm just pulling that in from Fangraphs under team stats, and I'm setting it to starters, and then my splits I'm using like either 30 days or 14 days, depends, and then. Shoot, I haven't done this in a while. Sorry. So sorry, you have to go to splits leaderboard, I think. Yeah, so this is one of the dynamically generated ones. Sorry, I'm rambling on here. I haven't done this in since last baseball season. So, so here under the splits leaderboard, I would just say team batting versus lefties, and I would just choose like a range. So you could say like 30 days, for instance. And then just click update. And obviously there's not going to be anything here because this is regular season, so teams haven't played in 30 days. But when the season is underway, this would have stats, and I would literally just copy them. I would use the advanced tab here. Just click the advanced tab, and I would just copy these stats and literally just paste them in. So again, you can write a script for that, like a Python script or an R script or whatever, to pull it in, but honestly, it's once you have it down, if you just bookmark the tabs, it takes like 2 minutes to just copy and paste it in, and everything from there will update. And then similarly, I have relief pitchers that I'm bringing in. Now, for mine, I did team relievers rather than individual relievers. So this is just like the relief pitchers' advanced stats for per team over a given sample. And I believe... So this is one of those tables that you actually can bring in. So I have the link here. And it just dynamically updates every day. And from there, I'm just like making an adjustment, essentially. And this comes into play within the predictions. So I get like an expected ERA, and then this I think I changed the name of this actually in the starting tab to like pitch factor. So maybe I'll change that here too. It doesn't matter in the least what you call it, but essentially all this is doing is this is just taking their, like what I'm calling their expected ERA, and then it's dividing it by the average to get like a multiplier. So essentially, right? So if one is average, lower is better for the pitcher. So you can see like number one here, and again, this is team based. Number one, our ranking was Milwaukee, and this was for their relief staff. So they had a decent relief staff. And again, I don't know the time frame. I think this is like 30 days, or it could be 12 games or something. I forget. It doesn't really matter. You play around with it and figure out what works for you. And then similarly, so you can see. So essentially, what this is saying is like, let's say a team was projected to score four runs on average. If they were playing Milwaukee, we would multiply that 4 by this 0.692. So it would actually be closer to like 2.8 or something like that. So it would drop down. Whereas if they were playing whoever this is down here, the Rockies. The Rockies did not have a good bullpen for the last part of the season anyways. So in this case, you would take like that same 4 runs, you would multiply it by 1.4. So the team would actually be projected to score like 4.5 or 5 runs or something like that, whatever the math works out to, right? So that's essentially what this, what we'll call pitch factor is doing. Okay. So this is for the relief pitchers. And then I do the same for starting pitchers, except starting pitchers, importantly, I am pulling in the individual pitchers, right? Because it's not useful to us to know a staff in general. We want to know who's pitching that day, because individual pitchers obviously have a huge impact on the outcome of the game. But you can see it's the same thing. So in this case, like for this sample, Musgrove was the best starter. He had the lowest pitch factor, and it makes sense. Burns was good, Smiley, Lamet, that makes sense. I think Cole was in the top 20, Bauer's right there at 17. And again, these rankings, they don't have any bearing on anything. Like, I'm not utilizing these in any way, but it just helps me like quickly make sense of things and see if things add up. Mainly when I'm like building this, right? Like when I built this, if I see Cole is like in the top 10, then I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But if he's like towards the bottom third of the league or something, then I be a little bit worried and check my calculations type of thing, right? So I do this for all the starters, and I believe my threshold on this is like starting pitchers with 10 innings pitched. Again, this is something I'm just dynamically generating, bringing in. So you can see actually, if I bring it down, if I actually go to the URL, we can see right here. So there it is, right? And so these are all the pitchers, and it looks like my settings was pitching, all teams, single season, 2020. So I would change this, and then this is just last 30 days, with a minimum innings pitched of 10. And so again, I would just bring that in, and it dynamically updates every day. And so now we have our starting pitcher stats, we have our relief pitcher stats, we have our team batting versus lefties and righties, and then the general, again, I haven't tested it, so it might work, it might not. I'm probably not going to bet full games this year, to be honest. I'm probably just going to stick to first 5 because that's proven to be profitable for me. But for you, it might be something different. Who knows, right? So the only other things I do before we get into the actual projections, And does anyone have questions while we're here? If you have questions, put them in the chat, and I'll try my best to answer them. But the only other thing is park factor, and I'm really only using this for totals. So that's the other thing. This model is it might look complicated. It's really not though. You could add in another layer of complexity. I don't have home and away splits. For me, it was more important to just get pitcher versus batter. But obviously, like if you're factoring in home versus, and I do like, I think I just add like a little home advantage, just a generalized one, which theoretically isn't correct, but for my purposes, it gets me close enough. But you could technically build this out with home or away, but you'd be doubling your workload essentially. Which, if you want to do it, that's fine. It's the exact same process. You just have to make sure you're referencing the correct teams based on if they're home or away. But mine doesn't do that. So mine is, again, it might look complex. It's not. It's fairly straightforward. And the only thing I'm using park factor for is just for totals, really. Again, I don't bet a lot of totals. There are so many things that go into totals that you would want to take into consideration, like the weather, the barometric pressure, whole bunch of stuff that I just haven't built into this model. So again, it's a best estimate, and for my purposes, it's been fine. Again, my main focus has been those first 5 bets, and some money line bets and spreads. But if you want to do it, this is how I do it. So I just get this from ESPN, and again, you can bring it in just using the import HTML. It updates every day, and this will give you your runs, home runs, and essentially it gives you what you can call a park factor. So Rogers Center is first because the Jays didn't play any games in Toronto last year, right? So this is actually not accurate because Toronto didn't play any games in Toronto, and you can see it has Salem Field listed because that's where they actually did play their home games. Okay, so predictably, like Coors is up at the top, right? So this is essentially saying, so if Globe Life in Arlington is the average of 1, then this is just an adjustment. So when teams go to Coors, they can expect to score 1.397 more runs than average. So if teams expect to score 10 runs in Arlington, then by this and this alone, in theory, when they went to Coors, they'd score 14 runs or 13.97 runs, so 14 runs, right? Whereas if they're at Wrigley, make sure you can see this. If they're at Wrigley, they'd score 74% of 10, so like 7.5 runs. So we'll call it 7 runs type thing. So that's what the park factor is doing. So on its own, it doesn't really have a huge impact, but you can obviously use it as a multiplier. So if you have the total, your expected total of your 2 teams, then whoever the home team is, you just multiply the total by whatever this park factor is for the home park, right? And that's simply what I'm doing. And then lastly, I have validations, and we'll get to the validations in a second. But these are just I put these down for when I need to do like a nested VLOOKUP, or if I'm referencing something in like a drop-down menu. I just like to have all of my validations on one page, so you can see like I have all the teams listed. I have all the and then I have the team again, and then the park name, and that's so I can easily reference the correct park for the home team. And then I have handedness. This is for pitchers, so left and right. So we would use all that data in the projections. And this is where things look scary, but they're not. I get confused sometimes too. And I built the thing, but once you build, like when I'm building it, things make sense. And then when I look at it, I'm like, what is this? But then when you actually go back into it, it sort of makes sense. So essentially what I do every day is I'll just, I'll reference, the sports book. So I'll have like my sports book on the right-hand side of my screen. and I'll just enter in the away team and the home team. And again, this is a list, so this is referencing in the validations, and it's important for me that I keep it this way because this is referencing team names in other sheets, and things will break if they're not correct. So I would enter in the team and then the pitcher. And again, the pitchers are from a gigantic list. This is from the starting pitchers tab. So I just turn this into a validation. And so once I have my teams and my pitchers, I denote whether they're a lefty or a righty. And then from there, calculations happen. So essentially, first we get our expected runs. And what this is saying is just, so this is where it looks complicated. It's not that complicated though. So it's saying this is for Seattle, okay? So it's saying if D8, which is referencing their opponent's pitcher, if they are a lefty, then we're going to do all this stuff. And if they're not a lefty, so if they're a righty, then we're going to do the exact same stuff, but we're just going to reference the righties tab instead of the lefties tab. So at a high level, that's what it's saying. And what it's looking up, so again, in both cases, what it's looking up is it's doing a VLOOKUP of B7, which is the team we're referencing, and we want their team batting stat, which is that expected run stat, essentially. Okay? And so the only difference is if it's a lefty, it's pulling from team batting versus lefties. If they're a righty, it's pulling from team batting versus righties. Okay? So that's the only difference there. And it's pulling that stat in. And then there's an if error. And this if error is just to reference. So it's saying if you can't find this team Mariners in team batting versus lefties, then we're going to do a nested VLOOKUP. And in that nested VLOOKUP, we are going to use our first input is actually going to be the second VLOOKUP. And this VLOOKUP is going to be whatever is in B7. We're going to look we're going to check in validations and see what their short name is, and we'll use that for the name. And so essentially what you can say is, so it's saying, okay, if this is a lefty, then we want team batting versus lefties. But you'll notice the team we were referencing were the Mariners, and you'll see under teams, it's their abbreviations, right? So there's no team in this list called Mariners, so it will throw an error. So then, if it throws an error, what happens is it says, okay, well, if there's an error, then do this instead. Well, we're going to use another VLOOKUP, and this time we're going to reference Mariners, and we're going to see wherever Mariners are on this list, return this, and use this as the search instead. So now it says, okay, so Mariners aren't in that list, but now we're going to use Mariners, and we're going to search through this list for Mariners, and whatever Mariners returns, we're going to use that as our new search. Okay? So then we can now go back to our team batting versus lefties. And again, this would the team they're facing right now is actually a righty, so this wouldn't do anything because it's not a lefty. But it's the same principle. So now it would search for SEA and say, okay, great. SEA is a team in this list, so now we can return, based on the VLOOKUP, what we want to return, which is whatever corresponds to this this U column here. So whatever this value is, return that. Okay? So that's more complicated than it maybe needs to be. Or it seems more complicated than it is, sorry. And again, so if it goes through this and it's like, well, this isn't a lefty, this says R, it's just going to skip this whole first step, and it's just going to say, okay, do the exact same thing But instead of looking for team batting versus lefties, we're just going to use team batting versus righties. And then it's going to go through that VLOOKUP of a VLOOKUP process again, and it's going to pull that in. And the reason I do it that way is because we have different different sources. Because what am I trying to say? Different pages list teams differently. Some use the short form, some use the full form, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So, bottom line, so what this is saying is essentially, so this X runs should be whatever is in team batting versus righties for Seattle. And if we check, looks like it is 4.43. And again, this might be messed up. Yeah, okay. So 4.43. Great. So we got our expected runs. And then we would do the exact same thing for the other team. It's the exact same formula. It's just the inverse, right? So we have that. So we have 4.43 and 4.08. But then what we need to do is actually factor in that pitch factor, right? So this is just against a generic righty, what we can expect for the Mariners to put up, and this is just for a generic lefty, what we can expect for the Athletics to put up. Okay, so even though we've referenced the pitchers already and the handedness, we haven't applied any adjustments based on the individual pitcher. The only thing we're doing, we've only got just the generic versus a lefty and versus a righty. Okay, so where we make the adjustments is in this runs category. All right, and here all we're doing is we're just taking this runs, and then we're multiplying it by again a VLOOKUP of the opposing pitcher, whatever their pitch factor is, and we're multiplying that by 0.6, by 60%, because again the starting pitcher is only going to be in the game for roughly 60%, like 5 2/3 innings type thing, right? And then we're adding it to whatever the bullpen of the the Athletics bullpen, whatever their pitch factor is, but we're multiplying that by 40%, right? 60%, 40%, 100%. So then we have the 60% of the starters' pitch factor, 40% of the bullpen's pitch factor. We're adding it together, and whatever that new number that we've added together is, that's our multiplier by this 4.43. And then the last thing we're doing is we're going to, and again, this is just for totals. This last step, is for totals to save a step. The last thing we're doing is we're doing a VLOOKUP, again, of the home team, always the home team in this case. And we're checking in our validations to see, okay, so if the home team are the Athletics, if we come down here and say home team are Athletics, what is the park name of the Athletics? Well, in this case, for whatever reason, ESPN last year, something broke, and it's showing up as null, Oakland, California. But now we have this. So it's saying, okay, so this is the park name. So then look up whatever the park factor is. So then it will automatically go and search based on null, California, 0.775. And whatever this, to this point, whatever the adjusted runs total is, it will multiply it by the park factor. Okay? And this is doing the exact same thing, except like I mentioned before, even though we're looking at the away team, we're always referencing the home team's park factor. All right? So even, sorry to say that again, even though in this case we're pulling in the opposing team, who are the away team, their pitcher stats, we're always using the home team's park factor for both teams, right? Which logically makes sense because that's where they're playing. So from there, we get the expected runs. Okay. And then this exponent 1.83, I'm sure lots of you already know what this is, but this is for Pythagorean win expectation. Bill James, like Moneyball and all the sabermetrics work. This is like the most accurate exponent to use for baseball, essentially 1.83. You can use 2, but might as well, if the documentation's there, use 1.83. And then all this is I'm just doing, so always on the home team, I'm doing the Pythagorean win expectation, which is simply the home runs to the exponent 1.83 divided by home runs to the exponent 1.83 plus away runs to the exponent 1.83. And then the only other thing I do is for the home team, I multiply it by 1.08 to give a home boost, essentially a home advantage. And honestly, 1.08 might be high. That's like an 8% boost. So it's probably high. Probably have to play around with that a bit, to be honest. But that gives us our win percentage for the home team. And then to cheat, especially if we're adding in this multiplier on the home advantage, and honestly, it might be closer to like 1.04 for this. And again, this is just doing this is okay. It's not really the correct way to do it, though. First of all, some teams play better at home than others. We all know that. So the truest way to do it would have to be using home and away stats, and it would automatically factor that in. What you could look at doing is splitting this up. So like if you said your home advantage was 4%, then you would want to do whatever this number is times whatever this number is plus 50% of 4, so plus 2%. And then for the away team, whatever the home advantage is, it would be whatever your run is minus 50% of 4%, so minus 2% to divide it evenly. That's the second correct way of doing it. This way is a kind of a junky way to do it that I'll probably end up changing, to be honest. But we can see, so we have our home probability win percentage, and then we have our away win percentage. And I'm just cheating because obviously this needs to add to 100, so you can just take the inverse. You can run the formula again if you wanted to, or you can just do 1 minus whatever the home is, and it'll get you your 48%. And from there, you get odds. Again, I know I have a lot of American followers, and I know even in the Slack group, we have a lot of Americans. Nothing wrong with American odds, but decimal odds are way easier to work with. It's way faster to compute things. You don't have to worry about positives and negatives like screwing things up. Again, because to get the odds, it's literally just the inverse, or not the inverse. I always mess this up. I'm lost for words at this second. It's the opposite though. So it's essentially just 1 divided by percentage gets you the odds, and then 1 divided by odds will get you the win percentage. So they go back and forth. So we have our odds, and then next thing, it's straightforward. So again, if you're a member, you know how to do this, and if you're not a member, now you'll learn how to do this. All we would do is enter in the bookmaker's odds, and that gets a win percentage. Now, what I do is I make a little extra thing here, and it doesn't really matter because you're using your win percentage and the odds available. But I always like to see what the true win percentage is so I can calculate the juice. So technically, I'm getting 2.85 is 35.09%, and 1.49 is 67.11. Well, that obviously doesn't add up to 100. It adds up to 102.2 rounded. So the juice is 2.2%. And then we can get like the true quote unquote probability of the odds. But again, you're not actually factoring in the win probability from the bookmaker into like Kelly criterion or anything like that. You're using the odds. So this is more just like a nice to know. And then you can enter in the total if you wanted to. And so in this case, like the total was 8. And this total is literally just the sum of these two numbers. So it's like 7.22. And then the total diff, I just do an absolute, which you don't have to do absolute. I just figure it's easier to not have positive and negative numbers. But this is literally just taking whatever the bookmaker's total is and subtracting my total. So in this case, we're like 0.8 runs lower. So we might have looked at betting like the under type thing. These value projections don't actually do anything anymore. These were just like adjustments I made. So I'm not going to really talk about them. I had them in all my models and I don't really use them anymore because if you're using Kelly criterion and an EV threshold, it doesn't really matter. But these were essentially just to like, this was just saying what the value in the line is. And this was taking essentially my win, subtracting it from the bookmaker's win. And it's worth noting, I don't actually know if, like, this is just a random, I just picked two random teams, and I don't know if these odds were for this game or what. So who knows? Anyways, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so this was just taking like the money line value to see if there's value in my line, and then adjusting it, which was essentially I just had like a floor and a ceiling. Again, this doesn't matter because it's not really relevant. I'm not really using it anymore. But essentially I just like had an edge adjustment where it would take like 71% of whatever so like 71% of this 14 was like 9.74%. And then basically if it was over, I don't even know. I can't remember, to be honest. If it was over a certain threshold, then it was a bet. But now I just use Kelly and EV, and we can just say if the EV is over. So we can see like we have an adjusted threshold. So our adjusted EV threshold here is $2.45, which is 0.35% of whatever this bankroll is. So I was using a $700 bankroll. Because I split my bankrolls. Why did I split my bankroll? Oh yeah, because hockey and baseball were going at the same time during COVID, like during the weird bubble. So I split them and then split them again because I didn't want to use my full bankroll. So this was like started with 500. I forget, to be honest. I didn't really adjust it correctly, but you would enter in like whatever your bankroll is here, and then your Kelly adjustment, which was 18.2, which I did some analysis, and that seemed correct last year. But I think because there was so much variance, I'm actually just going to, for this year, I'm going to knock it down to either like 15 or maybe even 10, certainly to start the season. But yeah, so this is it. So just this simple Kelly criterion calculation, you can see here. So all this is saying is it's just taking H7, so it's saying my win probability, multiplying it by the odds available at the time, -1, divided by the odds -1, and then multiplying it by the bankroll, and then multiplying it by the expected, multiplying by the bankroll, and then multiplying it by the Kelly adjustment. So like essentially to get 15% of what the full Kelly would be. And that's all that's doing. And then the EV is simple. It's just taking, so I just say if it's greater than 0, because I don't want negative EV to bother showing up, because that's annoying. Because obviously you're not betting things that are negative EV, right? Or you shouldn't be. Okay. And then we're just rounding. So it's literally just taking H7, which is, again, our win probability, multiplying it by our Kelly criterion bet size, and then multiplying that by the odds. So it's essentially, it's standard EV. It's percentage of the time you win, how much you win, minus percentage of the time you lose, how much you lose, right? It's standard EV stuff. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm just adding it in. And so this, you can see here, so based on this $29.81 bet, the EV in the long run, I can expect to make $10.96. So therefore, it's a good bet, which would go over this adjustment. And you can see as after I change my bankroll to 1,000, the EV threshold is automatically updated as well. So this would be a good bet in this case. So we bet $30 on who was it, the Mariners, and hope for the best. So that's really the MLB model. And then the only thing different, or the only extra thing for more bets is the first five. So again, this is just pulling in similar things. It's not, but again, like I said, the reason these expected runs are different than these expected runs, which you would expect them not to be, the reason they're different is this is just using the straight lefty versus or team batting versus lefty or team batting versus righties. It's not factoring in this extra like with the bullpen, because obviously in most scenarios the bullpen isn't a factor in first five bets, right? And if they are, you're probably not winning that bet. So that's why the numbers look a little bit different, but it's the same process. I'm just pulling in the expected runs for each team, and then I'm making an adjustment. Now, this runs adjustment is a little bit different. So what I'm doing here is, again, I'm taking, so E7, if I scroll over, and I should actually change that. See, I haven't made all these adjustments. So this is actually wrong. I don't want to be referencing E7. I want to be referencing this T7 now. There we go. So all I'm doing is I'm taking this expected runs and then I'm multiplying it by, again, the starting pitcher from the opposition. So Chris Bassett in this case, you can see I'm just doing a VLOOKUP. So it's Chris Bassett, starting pitchers, W6 to Y162, and 3 is literally just pulling in their, what happened here? Sorry, I'm cramped. I'm on one monitor trying to do all of this, and it's really a struggle. So W to Y and 3, so it's just pulling in their pitch factor, right? So same as before. It's pulling in, so it's multiplying the expected runs by their pitch factor, but we don't have to make any adjustments. We don't have to do the 60-40 adjustment because we're just focused on starting pitchers. And then whatever that number is that it gives us, and again, this is also probably not the most correct way, but it's the most like quote unquote clever way I could come up with doing it, and it seemed to work well. So whatever that number is, I'm dividing it by 9 because that would give us the expected runs over 9 innings, right? But we only care about first 5. So what I'm doing is I'm taking, like, if this were full game over 9 innings, here's the number. So I'm going to divide it by 9 to get our per innings expected runs. And then whatever that number is, just multiply it by 5 to get our first 5. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you're watching live, if that makes sense, or let me know in the comments down below if you think there's a better way to do it. Honestly, though, like I said, 81, I think it was like August 1st on, 81% of my profit came from first 5 bets. So I'm not going to mess with it too much. But that's essentially it. And then it would be this, yeah, so I just want to change this slightly. Why is that now? Oh, of course. Sorry, this is what I shouldn't be fixing things on the fly. Sorry, guys. There we go. So essentially, and then it's the exact same thing from here on out, right? We're getting the win. So again, we probably want to play around with this percentage. And in this case, we're not actually factoring in the park factor. And again, I don't think it matters because we're not really betting. At least I wasn't betting first 5 innings totals. Could factor in the park factor. Oh, I'm sorry. Jesus, I should have looked at this before I came on here. I'm I'm winging it. I am factoring in the park factor. I'm just doing it a little bit differently. I'm only applying it just to the total though. Again, you could do this full game, just apply it directly to the total rather than like in the lookup, but it's the same thing. I'm just taking the sum of the two, and then I'm multiplying it by whatever the park factor is of the home team. Okay, easy peasy to get my total, their total. And then again, same as before, these value projections, while they're pretty to look at, it could be argued, I guess, these don't actually matter anymore. I'm not using these anymore. This do not erase. I could erase because, again, I'm not using it anymore. All I care about is the Kelly and the EV, and that's where I'm getting my bets. That's where I got my bets all last season. I added this in pre-season, and I didn't use it once, so... I just don't like changing things, and I honestly I don't want to have to rewrite my script, because what I would do essentially, and the script takes 2 seconds to change, but what I would do essentially is once I have a bet I like, and this is where it gets a little unwieldy going like across with everything, but it is what it is. I would just click add bet, and that automatically adds it to the we'll call the bet queue. And I'll just keep going. And then at the end of the day or the next day, I just click clear all. And if this still works correctly, looks like it does. Yeah, it just deletes everything. And then we're good for the next day. So that's the MLB model. Again, it's everything I teach you in the course. It's literally all I'm doing is I'm running regressions on team batting. And then I'm splitting it into lefty and righty after I have my coefficients. I'm running regressions on pitching, splitting it up into starting and relief. You could run separate regressions on starters and on relief pitchers if you wanted to. But literally that's all I'm doing. 90% of the work in this model is just getting the formulas to make sense to match up correctly. But again, it's once you have your numbers, how you apply them isn't really that tricky once you think through it. And you just got to do it in trial and error. So like this, where is it? Like a nested VLOOKUP like this, what I do when I write these, if you think I just sit down and I write this all in, and it's the same thing like if I'm coding a website, or if I'm writing, like a new script in Python or whatever. If you think I'm just sitting down and saying, haha, I got this, and writing this all at once, and it just works, that couldn't be further from the truth. Sit down, think about what you want to do, and then I chunk it out, right? So I say, okay, let's just make sure that it's returning, if it's a lefty or righty, make sure that it's returning that correctly. Then make sure it's pulling in the right number. And then once you know it's pulling in the right numbers, then it's easy to add in multiplication, division, whatever you need to do. But I think you guys get scared sometimes because you see a formula and you get overwhelmed by it. But you just take the formula piece by piece and don't rush it. Honestly, 9 times out of 10, when something's not working, it's going to be because you have an errant bracket somewhere. You haven't closed things off correctly, or you have one too many, or whatever the case is. So like it might look complex. It's really not, though, when you break it down to what everything is doing, right? And like people get tripped up on like a nested VLOOKUP. All this is doing is it's just a VLOOKUP where the secondary VLOOKUP is just your key. Right? So if you know how to look something up, right? So if you know how to say, I want to look up whatever the short form name of the Mariners is, if you know how to look that up, then you know how to apply that as your key to a secondary VLOOKUP, right? It's not a difficult thing to do. It takes practice, trial, and error. That's all it comes down to, and that's all this stuff. And Google is your friend. I Google everything all day, every day, or I bug my friends on Twitter. Shout out to you know who you are, guys that bug about machine learning stuff. But that's how you learn and get better. It's not you're not just gonna sit down and write this. And if you do, you're smarter than I am, or you're better at this than I am. And kudos, all the power to you. But just stick with it and make it work for you. So that's the MLB model. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, so hopefully things are making sense. And if not, if you are catching this on the replay, if you're a member, make sure to ask questions in chat if you're stuck. And if you're not a member, if you want to become a member, again, sign up below actionbackers.com. Use code WELCOME20 and you'll get $20 off your first month. I have 2 tiers. So our standard tier you get access to all the courses and all my tools, as well as the Slack group, show you how to build models and everything like that. And if you want to become a premium member, I offer my picks that are derived from my models, so from NHL and MLB. And honestly, a lot of guys, they just like to have that to compare to what their own thing is doing and see where it differs, where it's the same, things like that. And I'm more premium content coming in the future. So again, if you want to sign up, actionbackers.com. The link's in the description below, and use code WELCOME20. You'll get $20 off your first month. So now that we've looked at MLB, if you stuck around this whole time, thank you. We're going long today. I think this is our longest stream so far. Yeah, it will be post. Sorry, I see it. Roll the dice with Elio and Mark. It'll be up on YouTube right after the stream. It always is. So as soon as it finishes processing, it'll be up there, so you can watch the whole thing through. So for everyone who's stuck with me, thank you. So let's look at some NHL picks for today. Honestly, the model's not liking a lot. You can see the outputs here. See if I can make this bigger for you. Maybe like that. Hopefully you can see that okay. So you can see it's not given where the odds are, it's not liking a ton. So honestly, my only pick today would be Philadelphia. We have them at like 57% to win, and at last check the odds were around like 1.917 or something. So still close to a pick'em. Would not be surprised if Washington wins, but there's some value in the line there. You can see it should be around 1.76. Another one that if you're feeling adventurous, and I hate this bet, I made the bet, but I hate it, is the Buffalo Sabres. You can see we have them as a slight favorite over Pittsburgh. And I know Pittsburgh's not good, but Buffalo is not a good team. We can see the odds are like 1.93, and I think you can get Buffalo for like 2.82 or something crazy, like a huge dog. So what I actually did instead is I took Buffalo +1, and the reason for that is the +1 I think was still paying like 2.16, or it's certainly above like even money. Again, I hate this bet, and given how the month's been going, who knows? Like they were up the other night, like 4-0, and I think they ended up losing 5-4 or something silly. So that's one option. But again, there hasn't been a lot of value. Like a lot of these teams, like even like Carolina, we have them at like 1.7, and which is like 59% to win. So we have them as a heavy favorite to win the game. But the sportsbooks have them at like 1.44 or 1.5, and there's no value in the lines, and so it's been tricky to find value, and it seems like the favorites are winning at a reasonable clip. But again, like 2 nights ago, I looked, and based on who I had as the favorite, would have gone 6-3, which on the face of it, hey, 6-3 sounds awesome. Except when you factor in the juice, would have broke even. So, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, if you're just going to be betting these, like, minus 190 favorites or whatever, like, you're going to win, but it takes one loss to wipe out a month of profits when you're betting that heavily juiced teams, right? Maybe not a month, but like you win 5, you lose 1, and you're losing money type deal. Just with the juice, so it has been tough. So I think I'm gonna roll with Philly, and I'm gonna take a shot with Buffalo. I don't have a lot of faith in Buffalo here, but the price is right. I'm taking them at the +1. And in this scenario, I would be to win. Like the whatever. So like if your unit is $50, I would say to win 50. So you're risking less than 50 to win 50, rather than putting 50 on to win, like, I don't know, 65 or whatever the odds are. It's just another way to mitigate some risk. But so those are the only picks that really stand out tonight. There's not much else. Like, everything else is either in line with the odds or there's just no value, right? Like, the Islanders 60% over the Devils. Matt, if you're watching, sorry, but that seems reasonable. Like, the other thing, like, we have Detroit at 42% to win. I'm not making this bet because last time I checked, the odds were like, I think it had Detroit at like 27% to win or something like that. So there is value in the line, but it goes back to what I talked about at the beginning of the stream. I'm not making this bet. And if they win against Tampa, then great. But I've been burned so many times. It just hasn't been profitable to bet these big underdogs just because you're getting a price that is plus EV. So again, that's not technically correct, but I don't care. And then one last, like, interesting stat, just for anyone who cares. We can look. So far this year, the visiting team has won 188 games, which is good for like 48%. So the home teams have won almost 52% of games, and the home advantage right now is right around 3.84%. Which is interesting because even 2 weeks ago it was like 1.12%. So sounds like, or it looks like to me at least, the home teams have they've been winning quite often at least the last week or so. So anyways, it's not really anything actionable with that, but I find it interesting. So there you go. All right. If there are no more questions, then I'm gonna end it here. It's been an hour and 10. Thank you guys for the participation. It's been awesome, and hopefully this was helpful. So again, let me know either on Twitter, or if you're a member, in Slack, or in the comments below. And yeah, if you want to sign up. The link's in the description below. Thanks.